with that, are you ready to start?
Yeah,
Okay, perfect. So, can you start by telling me about yourself and like who you are and what you do?
sure. Yeah. Well, my name is Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've been involved in creative spaces, so I'm an actor. That's what I studied in college, and I just graduated college. Um,
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I studied that in child psychology. Um, so yeah, that's me. I grew up in New York City,
Mm-hmm.
where I still live in the same area that I grew up in. Um, yeah.
And then, so you are associated with a Call to Men, right? You're part of their youth ACT. Can you tell me a little
Yeah.
bit about that and like how you got involved in a Call to Men, or like why this issue is so important that you decided to pretty much join an organization that speak so heavily about it?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a couple parts to that question, I guess. I mean, primarily, how I got involved with A Call to Men is through a play that I was in called Now That We're Men. It was written by an acting teacher of mine who also directed it. And it was about standards of masculinity and rape culture. And it was written basically, it was born from different improvs and conversations I had with other fellow students in our for my acting class.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were working on something for that, and somebody who was helping us recommended me to apply for this new youth and young adult cohort that this organization called the Call to Men was developing,
Mm-hmm.
so that I could be involved in other ways in creating conversation and education around healthy masculinity, around gender-based violence.
Mm-hmm.
So I applied because I thought this sounds really cool,
Mm-hmm.
and I interviewed for it, and then they accepted me. So that's that. Why I'm interested in this work, I think, well, partly because the experiences I had being in this play really were some of the best I've had in my life, and we went to different boarding schools across the country, had different performances for students and people around close to our age or around our
Yeah.
age, and just like had different conversations about masculinity and about like confusing sexual situations, like including sexuality, but also just like how our sex ed is so bad basically in this
Yeah.
country, and like we don't get taught enough things, and how nobody wants to talk to us about this kind of stuff, and we all are really suffering as a result of it. So um and also just my own personal life experience with that kind of stuff led me to be interested.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you brought up sex ed because that's a completely different issue, but yet it's so like integrated with everything that we're kind of talking about today. And I think
Yeah.
it's like such an interesting issue too about sex ed in our country and like in our school systems and how it's not taught at all. And I think that's a really cool like conversation to bring up. But I think that's amazing. I think that's really interesting how you got into this. And so for the youth ACT, can you tell me what exactly that is? And this kind of goes with like what is a call to men as well? Like what is a call to men and the youth ACT?
Yeah. So, A Call to Men is an organization that focuses on promoting healthy manhood
Mhm.
and educating about healthy manhood, and also helping to end gender based violence and discrimination, and basically make the world and this country, but obviously the world and our communities, our culture, a safer place for all women and girls. And like that, all meaning everyone, even the people who are often forgotten,
Mhm.
which may be like Black trans women, for example.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's A Call to Men, and I know that they really focus on education. They go into different schools. They have different programs. They have these training workshops that you can do, which are really cool, and they have their own curriculum. And so Youth ACT was kind of like a branch of that, but it's led by young people. So our mission is pretty similar, I would say, but it's conversations with young people and for young people, and
Mhm.
it's a space where we can sort of not just educate each other, but also like talk about what we're going through related to all of this stuff, and
Mhm.
hopefully create safe spaces for people. Yeah.
I will say I love when organizations have like a different like subsection for youth because I think that's really important, especially when it's like the youth are going to be the people that change the future pretty much, and like we're the future And so like having like a space for a bunch of youth and like young kids to discuss these things is really important. I love how A Call to Men does that. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
I just think that's
Sorry.
interesting because I've met like or I've interviewed other organizations that do the same thing. I think it's really impactful to like see like young kids like setting up different like workshops and stuff like that. And I think it's really impactful. But anyway, I just like how A Call to Men does that. But for A Call to Men, what are some of the principles that you guys have?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure I could list a good amount of them off the top of my head. I know that on their website, like they'll have this specific
Yeah.
like bullet points with everything that would be so much more detailed maybe than what I could give. But I know like one of them would be we're trying to figure out the causes and the roots of the violence against all women and girls. And so like what how are how are we socialized that this is acceptable or that this goes not talked about or that this isn't something that everybody is working on in a really intense way to ensure it doesn't happen. um, I know another one is like elevating the point or emphasizing the fact that at the end of the day men have a lot of work to do in this area,
Yeah.
and that like of course it's not necessarily our voices that should be centered, but we have a lot of the work to do, if
Hmm.
that makes sense. Like there
Yeah,
should
no,
be other people that we're listening to. Yeah. And then I think I know a big thing that we talk about at A Call to Men, which I really, really appreciate, and was something that's really helpful for me to think about and constantly be keeping in mind, is centering the needs of the people who are at the margins of the margins, for example. That's like a call to men, what they call
yeah.
margins of the margins. But somebody, like I was mentioning before, a Black trans woman may be considered that. And the idea is if we focus on what Black trans women need, for example, need to feel safer, need to um, live longer because right now their life expectancy is so low.
So
If we center those needs, then everybody basically will win. If we really focus on the people who are, as A Call to Men, their term is, are at the margins of the margins. So
I think that's
yeah,
amazing. I think that's really interesting. I think that's really important to focus on like those that we don't really like as a society really focus on, like you said, like Black trans women and how they're so like they're so much like they're so ostracized, I guess, by like a majority of the population because they're not really understood in a lot of ways. And I think that's really important to like focus on these individual issues because like you said, it does. If you help them, it helps everyone. It's a win for everyone.
right, right. I think A Call to Men also just had a like a community call with trans women of color, some of them being Black, or maybe one of them I'd have to like look at the lineup again that they had of speakers. But yeah, I think it's important because a lot of people, I think we spoke about this when I first saw you, but a lot of people would
Yeah.
think, oh, like certain things are not my issue because it doesn't involve me. When in actuality, like we need to be we need to be just as motivated
Yeah.
for these other people because it matters for us too. Like
Yeah.
if we're deconstructing what it means, like the binary of gender, for example, which includes unhealthy masculinity in that binary, like if we're deconstructing that for everyone, everyone's going to benefit basically. Yeah,
Yeah. I think that's amazing. I think because a lot of people, yeah, like you said, a lot of people don't think it's their issue, but it is their issue.
yeah, yeah,
Everyone really notices, if everyone realizes that, then it'll benefit everyone, even them if they don't think it'll benefit them. So I think that's really important to understand. I love that principle of A Call to Men. But now into like kind of like the core of A Call to Men, which is like, in my opinion, I know it's like gender-based violence and everything, but I think it all stems from like what toxic masculinity or like toxic masculinity. So
yeah.
can you like explain what toxic masculinity is, or in your terms, the man box? Because I know A Call to Men really focuses heavily on like the term of man box, but can you kind of
Yeah.
explain what that is?
Yeah. Um, the man box, which is I know you were saying too, it's like it's a call to men's
Hmm.
term and way of putting things, which I think is really helpful. It's basically all these different characteristics that everyone, men, people of all genders are socialized to believe are what men are supposed to be like, what manhood is like. So it includes a lot of things like you're not really able to show emotion except for anger. Probably that would be like the only acceptable emotion to show.
Yeah.
Or do everything you can to not seem weak. Or don't be feminine. Don't act like somebody who's gay. Or, you know,
Yeah.
And I think of other things that are in there, but basically all of these things that we're socialized to say, okay, this is what a man looks like, somebody who's not weak, somebody who doesn't show emotion, somebody who doesn't need any help, somebody who doesn't ask for help. And I think it's well described as a box because it is really uh, confining and suffocating.
It is.
Um, and like stepping out of it is also a lot of the time you're condemned for it by maybe a family member or a friend or your community.
Yeah. And so how does this man box hurt men? Because I mean, even from what you just said, I can kind of like derive it. It's like it tells them not to be feminine or not to be gay in a sense. And so it's obviously inherently homophobic. So it teaches boys to be even if they are gay and they know they're gay, they have this built up internalized homophobia. And I know that's one way how it hurts men. But can you just shortly explain like how else this man box hurts men?
Yeah, I think it keeps people from being able to have close relationships. Like if you're not able to be vulnerable or express your how you're feeling, like, or ask for help, it keeps you very alone, very isolated.
Mhm.
It doesn't allow you to process things that you're going through, which can lead to a lot of pent up feelings and negativity inside. I also think it teaches you to um, not respect the women in your life, for example, because if that's considered other than, then, or sorry, less than is what I should say. If that's considered less than,
Mhm.
then the people in your life who are women, you're not going to be treating with the same amount of respect or care that you should.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and then I think ultimately it makes you turn on yourself and be down on yourself because even the most just like let's just say the most masculine person there is, and that's really true to who they are, what we would consider masculine.
Mhm.
Like there's still things that you'll be able to find that don't fit within that box about you because we don't really, as people, we're not like that. And then you might end up just feeling really, really negatively about yourself, regardless of how you identify, like with your sexual orientation, right? Because like somebody could appear what we would call to be gay and not even be that way,
Yeah.
or not even be gay, or they could be too, but it's just like, yeah, I'm doing a bad job of describing it right now.
It gives you like all these stereotypes. And I think the whole thing behind it is it's like it kind of just perpetuates hate in a sense, like whether it be hate of
Right.
people or hate of yourself. And I think that's the real harm it does because you're right, it does cause you to feel really lonely because you can't like form these real connections with people because you've been taught not to, in a sense. And
Yeah.
I do think that's the real harm of what this man box is. But how prevalent would you say the toxic masculinity or this man box is in our culture and our society?
Yeah, I think it's really prevalent. I mean, I can speak more just for like the spaces I've been in than necessarily like other areas.
Yeah,
But
fine.
like I think even, in New York City where I think people think everything is like the most progressive that it can be and everything is kind of so much more open. And I would totally agree with that, which is one of the things I like about it. But
Yeah.
in the spaces I've been in school as I've grown up, like I still think it's very prevalent. I still see it all the time. I mean, it's stuff that we internalize so much. Like it's always going to be there no matter where you are, I think.
Yeah.
And like especially at times in your life, like when you're young, even like into my age, like I'm in my very very early 20s, so like we're just discovering who we are, and so we're just trying to figure out like how we're seeing how uncomfortable it is to not adhere to these things like where we've been told we're supposed to adhere to.
Hmm. Yeah, no, and I completely agree. In my school as well, it's everywhere too, especially since I live in the South. It's like, oh, this the stereotype of the South being like backwards, which it's not completely true, but at the same time it is
Yeah.
completely true. And I think it is because it's hurtful. Like even for me, like I paint my nails, like I wear pearls, stuff like that. And like it's just the kind of like subtle things that you see from people that you're like, oh, that's deemed as feminine, so you must be gay. And it's just like me, I've known about this for a long time, so I don't necessarily get hurt by it, but it's just like other people that aren't as aware of this issue, they like get hurt
Yeah.
them as well. And I think that's the real harm. And it's really prevalent everywhere, especially in kids my age and teenagers and young adults. And especially even the older generations. I think that there
Yeah.
should be more conversations about this because it's more prevalent than many think. And I think that's really important to understand.
Yeah, and older generations like pass down their stuff to us, like
Yeah,
teach
exactly.
us how to be who we are or tell us what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And
Mhm.
especially when you're young, like of course you really take that to heart.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And I think, yeah, it's important to understand that I think it's really important to understand like it is everywhere and everyone, male or female, can like kind of like push the idea of this man box onto you. Well, of course, less female, but it
Yeah.
go both ways and majority man. But
Yeah.
I this is like a really loaded question, but I have seen in a lot of places that toxic masculinity is seen as a direct attack against men and against
Yeah.
masculinity. And I know it's a kind of hard question to answer, but do you think that toxic masculinity, that term, and this like movement to like kind of get rid of this toxic masculinity, this man box, is a attack against masculinity?
No, I don't at all. I mean, I understand why people may feel that way. I think it's a reaction to like having not been questioned for so long and like a lot of behavior has been passing for a really long time and now it's really scary for some people for that to be questioned. But I think ultimately, like we were saying earlier, this kind of work is for everyone. And there's, as we were saying, like there's lots of ways in which men are being very much harmed by the culture that we have around what manhood should look like, or this what we're, I think what you and I would agree as unhealthy manhood,
Yeah,
what some others may just see as manhood basically,
yeah.
or as being a man. And I think it's really harmful. And so basically what people are saying is like, this is going to be good for you too. You know, of course it's about like making the world a safer place for all women and girls, and that should be the goal, but it's also like doing internal work as men to get to that place that we can do that, that we can make the world that way. Because ultimately, it's about what men, how men are socialized, what we think about ourselves, how we feel about ourselves, how we are comfortable expressing ourselves, what we're allowed to be like. Yeah.
I completely agree. I think you said it perfectly, honestly. I think that's really important to understand. And I think I do think you said it perfectly. Um, but you said earlier that a cult of men really focuses on how this man box hurts women. So what are some ways that toxic masculinity in this man box hurts women or like perpetuates a cycle of violence against women?
Yeah. Um, that's a good question. I feel like, well, one of them is, I think part of being what we, part of what would be in the man box, and part of something that I think as a lot of men are socialized to do is only really refer to women or the girls in their life in a sexual way. Like that's the only acceptable way. Like if you have a platonic relationship with a girl, it's like, oh my gosh, like it's either like, well, why aren't you basically like dating that person or having sex with that person, or
Yeah,
like, what's wrong with you, you're really close to her, like, oh, like, you know. And there's, it's either questioned or you take the acceptable route, which is objectifying that person.
mhm,
And so then I think it leads men to think, oh well, women are objects, so that means I can treat them like this and that, and not as a person, not see somebody as human, which is of course really harmful, a harmful way of thinking. So I think that's one way. um, and as I was saying before, I feel like the man box just basically, when you boil it down, it tells you, oh well, any characteristic that seems more feminine is wrong. So that's another way of just um, denouncing women, saying made it matter less, I think.
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
subconsciously teaching you like misogyny.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
And I think that's really funny that you said about the like the platonic relationships because it's so true and it's so stupid if you really think about it. It's like that
Yeah.
makes sense. It's
Yeah,
like the dumbest thing ever.
totally. Yeah, and I mean, I've had a lot of platonic relationships with women in my life, and you know, I just think it's so silly. Like even in that movie, I think about When Harry Met Sally, which I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah,
Obviously, it's a very classic movie, but like at the crux of it is part of that question of like, can men and women really be friends? And it's like, I don't know. I remember that question really bothering me when I was younger because I'm like, I think yes. You know, I don't think it
yeah.
has to be such a difficult thing, but yeah.
And see, that even goes back to like a previous question, like how prevalent is this? It's like it's even in movies and TV shows and music, especially.
Yeah,
I-
yeah,
it's especially music too. But it is really prevalent like that. And a lot of the things it does teach are so stupid if you really like think about it. If you like step outside, if you like kind of like step away from what you've been learning your whole life and really like think about it, it's so stupid. But like this man box kind of teaches. Um, but another one of the things is homophobia and transphobia, and I think it kind of goes along the same lines. But can you kind of touch on how toxic masculinity affects the LGBTQIA plus community? How like
yeah,
promotes transphobia and homophobia?
yeah. I mean, I think, and I was mentioning a little bit earlier, but I feel like the man box just really promotes a binary way of thinking, which I think for people in the LGBTQ plus IA plus community or just queer people, like it we like you don't live in the binary that like
Yeah.
that's what you're trying to escape is like this way of like a man acts like this, a man is with women only, or a man is like this, or just all these binary ways of thinking about gender, like you're either a man or a woman and nothing else, like.
Yeah.
And I think that's what toxic masculinity or unhealthy manhood teaches you, to just stay in this binary of like there's men and there's women, and men are like this only specific way, and if you're not like this, there's something wrong with you.
Hmm.
And I think that that's just um, promotes this really awful way of thinking. And I think what happens also is it creates this fear in people where if they're not like this specific way of being, there's this fear that happens, because if you're outside of that, it means there's something so supposedly fundamentally wrong with you. So I
Hmm.
think it leads people to being afraid of queer people or afraid of trans people because they don't fall in that, and it's really threatening. It's
Hmm.
threatening because it makes you reflect on, well, what are the ways I don't fall into this? And if I don't, then what does that mean about me? So maybe I'm not being as eloquent as I could be with this, but
No,
I feel
I think you said it perfectly. I really did
yeah,
it perfectly because
yeah,
it just like kind of promotes this fear that you're not normal, like whatever the hell normal is.
right, right. Yeah, yeah. And I think yeah, like yeah, what I said I think is was good. Yeah.
No, I do. I think I think and I think a lot of people don't understand like how many levels there are to toxic masculinity, how it like even if you think it's just like man can't show emotions, like even just that like one sentence thing of what toxic masculinity preaches, it's like it affects so many different people because if you're not in that, then it's like
Yeah.
you should be scared of who you are. You should not like who you are because it's not what society deems as normal. I think
Yeah,
like it causes like misogyny and transphobia and homophobia. And I think you
totally.
actually got it perfectly. Of
Yeah. Wait, sorry, can I just quickly add on something too really quickly?
of course, yeah.
Yeah, I also think like what I was saying before, and something that I've learned in just like being lucky enough to be a part of a call to men, or there's a lot of great people that I follow on Instagram who just have like free, really wonderful education that they offer,
Mhm,
um, which is great. But like I think also because of this idea that anger is the only acceptable way to show emotion for men, like it creates a lot of violence against people. So like when they are afraid or they are feeling really scared about people threatening their identity, for example, and what that means to them, instead of being able to express that in a healthy way, it's violence. It's like, I'm going to beat you up, or I'm going to hurt you and harm you,
yeah.
which I think there's a lot of violence against trans people.
Uh,
And, and a lot of violence against queer people. So I think that that's part of where it can come from too.
It is. It all just comes from fear, and I think that's where it comes. Then, like you're saying, it comes of like it goes in like violence towards queer people or trans people, and as well as women too. And I think that's where all like the gender-based violence from toxic masculinity comes from. Is that they're only taught to show anger when when in fear. I guess like if they're fearful, then the only way they can express that fear is through anger. And I think that's
Yeah.
where this violence comes from. But now that we kind of like covered everything that like a cult, like the core of a cult to men and like everything they kind of like stand for, they're fighting against. Can you tell me what strides are being taken to kind of like dismantle this man box?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know A Call to Men has a curriculum that they teach, like where, they'll go into different schools or um, they'll do different training workshops for people where they talk about not just the man box and all these different things. And like, I think education and understanding really helps people start to understand how
Yeah,
they can change things. But also, I know they talk about exactly what you were saying, like how unhealthy manhood hurts queer people, hurts trans people, how, all of these issues are intertwined, like it's in with racism, for example. And like, so I think that I know education is something that's being done, I think, to help and which is hopefully what we're trying to do too with Youth Act, is just have education and conversation around things. And I think obviously there's still a lot of work to be done, and
uh-huh.
there always will be. But I would hope, and I think at least in my short lifetime so far, it
Mhm.
seems like more and more people are open to learning about this kind of stuff, open to making some sort of change. And that doesn't mean that everything is perfect or that there isn't more work to be done. But hopefully, it seems like there's, eh, you know, small push in
Yeah.
that direction.
And so what kind of healthy manhood would you like to come out of this? Because I know there's a lot of different like ways you can look at manhood and see how it's healthy, but like what what would you like to see change in the man box, or how would you like to see this toxic masculinity become healthy masculinity?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think the first thing that came to my mind was just like there's no limit to what there's no specific prescription, I guess. Like it's whoever you are should be acceptable. That should
Yeah.
be part of your manhood. Whoever you are, whatever you like to wear, however you like to act, whoever you like to spend time with, like all of those things. The other thing that I think about though, that I think is really helpful while we're working towards that, because like obviously that's not where we're
Yeah.
at, um, is trying to either call in or call out people in your life
Yeah.
who are saying things that are homophobic or transphobic, or like who are acting in a way that's really adhering to an unhealthy standard of masculinity. And it doesn't have to be this like, thing where you yell at somebody, but it can be like, hey, like, here's what I think, where I think you're wrong here. And like, I think just like interrupting certain things and really trying to have conversations with people.
Yeah.
And in a lot of spaces, maybe like using your voice in a way where, because maybe people will be less likely to question or silence you in a specific situation, like
Yeah.
knowing that and using that to try to help start a conversation or change a culture where you are.
Hmm. So like pretty much being like a conscious ally or an active ally to everyone, as well as getting rid of the stereotypes that toxic masculinity kind of like promotes or
Yeah,
perpetuates. I do think those are two of the most important things, especially being an active ally, because there needs to be more people that are kind of like sticking up for the underdog, I guess, or like kind of like promoting their own form of masculinity, or their like how strong they are, and they're standing up for everyone else no matter who it's around. Like they're always trying to be the good person, and they're always trying to like promote being healthy rather than being toxic, and just letting those toxic things happen to other people. I think that's really important. And it's
yeah,
a skill you have to learn, but I think the more you
yeah,
do,
it's hard.
the stronger you'll get, and the better at it you'll get. And I think that's
Yeah, yeah. And like, I don't know, I think something that helps me too is I when I sometimes like will make mistakes when I'm saying something or not say it perfect, or like in a moment maybe I will get more angry than I wish I could, or like I'll be not sorry, oops, I'll be not as I won't speak up as much as I should. Like just treating everything as a learning opportunity too.
yes.
But also knowing that you do have a responsibility at the same time.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. You're right. It is all like a learning opportunity. And I've had many times where I was like, shit, I wish I said something. I wish I could have stuck up for
Yeah.
the person. I wish I could have stuck up for myself. And it sucks, but at the same time, it is a learning opportunity. The next time you'll realize the mistakes you made last time, so you can kind of like better yourself. And you're right, there's
Right.
responsibility for every man, or yeah, man that is conscious of this issue to like kind of like
Right.
with the healthy side of masculinity rather than the toxic side of masculinity.
Hmm.
Um, and this I kind of just we kind of just went over this, but in more like with this question is how can someone promote healthy masculinity, or um
Yeah.
how can someone promote healthy masculinity?
Yeah. I mean, I think like if you're trying to um, change yourself and do like internal work, or just like help yourself step out of these
Hmm.
um, really rigid standards, I think like that's a way to do it. Like, because, maybe that'll show somebody else in your school, or like wherever you are at your job, or at your after school, or whatever you're doing, that like there's another way to be, and that's acceptable and that's okay. Um, but I also think, yeah, like we were saying before, trying to talk to the people in your life, like where finding out, I guess, basically like where you have influence. I don't know. A lot of people have like that I know ended up just gaining a bunch of followers on TikTok, which is like super cool. It's really great that there's platforms like that you can like easily gain a good following, like, or even if you don't have a huge following, like whatever platform you have, which it could just be like your family member,
Hmm.
just trying to use that and um, like start conversations or interrupt certain behavior, or
Hmm.
yeah, or have meaningful, like I was saying, meaningful conversation with somebody.
Yeah. And I think what you said in there is really important, that it all starts with yourself. It all starts with like work on yourself. And like when you really come to that realization, you work on yourself and you work on all the flaws that you have. That kind of just it goes with and or like promoting healthy masculinity, because I think it does all start with yourself. And if you really fix yourself, then you can help fix others and you can help like fix the problem as a whole. And so I think that's really important what you said. But how important is education in this issue? Like how important is education to occult men? How important is education to you? And how important is educating boys about this issue?
Yeah, I think education is really important to a call to men. I think it's something that's really important to me, both in the sense that I feel really lucky because, like, through being in the acting program I was in, and through getting to do this, be a part of this cohort, I have been in spaces where I've had easy access to a lot of education on these things. And
Yeah.
also, like, I didn't always have that. And I was younger, and I like wish I had that from a much, much younger age, even too.
Hmm.
And not everyone has that at all. So I think it's really important just because it gives you the tools and the language and the understanding to then like try to do something about it, at least, whether it be for yourself or for others or both. And I think also a lot of people don't bring up these topics, and it's not considered something that's important to learn about in school,
Yeah.
or yeah, or in sex ed, like we were saying, even because if we're talking about gender-based violence, like that obviously includes rape, and I think that's something that's important to talk about in sex ed, which usually isn't.
Yeah.
Or and so I think yeah, I think education is important, and unfortunately, these things aren't always treated as things that are important to be educated about.
It is. A lot of times they're shut down. I think
Yeah, yeah,
it does more harm than good. So I think education is the most important thing, because knowledge is power. Like education
yeah,
is so important to everyone, no matter who you are. I think I that's why I like Occult Men, and like all like the kind of work they do with education, going to schools and kind of teaching people about this issue, and especially gender-based violence. Like you're saying, rape is not really talked about. It's such a taboo topic. And I think just educating teenagers and kids and young adults about these issues can really go a really long way and help a lot of people. Um, but if there is one important thing you'd like to say to anyone that watches this, what would you like to say?
oh wow, that's really that's good. I don't know, I mean, I think just like hmm, anybody who watches it, I think, sorry, I'm really thinking about this because that's a good question.
No, I know
um
your time.
yeah, I think maybe this is just the thing that's coming to my mind right now, but just um even though it can be really painful and hard, I think engaging in deep self-reflection around this topic is super, super important, and not letting yourself dismiss it just because it might be hard to dive into, is really important to keep in mind. And I think pushing through that, you might be really grateful later on for the ways in which you're able to think of yourself better, or the ways in which you're able to treat the people in your life better, or have closer relationships. So yeah, I guess just like, even though this is really hard to talk about and
Yeah,
can bring up stuff that was really hard for you when you know, or is still really hard for you, that doesn't mean it's something to shy away from.
I completely agree. That's what we were kind of talking about earlier. It's like it all starts with yourself.
Yeah,
It all really does start with yourself. But thank you so much. That's all the questions I had.
awesome.
Thank you. That was amazing. Thank you so much. I love
Yeah, no problem.
you, and it was amazing.
Oh, great. I'm so glad. Yeah, I hope I gave things that were helpful.
No, you did, of course. Thank you.
You're welcome.